Hey everyone, I'm Sally. Welcome to Simply Stretch. Today's video is going to be just a little bit different. I wanted to take a minute to talk about why I started Simply Stretch and kind of what the truth is behind yoga. So let's get into it. Well, we can just start from the beginning a little bit here. I was raised in a small town in Minnesota. I grew up in a Christian home with two devoted Christian parents that really helped lead me towards God throughout my childhood. And then fast forward to my senior year of high school, I was doing community college in high school, so all my classes were online. And I decided to move down south with one of my sisters who's a travel nurse. And we moved down to Arizona for a few months, and it was great. The weather was great. It was so nice to get out of Minnesota winter, and I spent a lot of time reading my Bible, journaling, going to church, and I grew a lot in my faith in those 3 months for sure. It was a pretty awesome time, and I had a lot of free time because I was pretty much just doing my 4 or 5 online classes and reading the Bible. My sister was working most days, so pretty much my only responsibility was school and to take care of her dog, take him for a few walks a day, get his energy out. So I had a lot of extra time, and when you have extra time, it's super easy to do all the things to take care of yourself. So I started doing yoga because my body wanted to move in other ways than just taking a walk or jog. And it felt so good to stretch. I've always had back problems, neck problems, kind of runs in my family, so yoga felt amazing. And I had seen other Christians do it all my life, so I didn't really think there was a problem with it at all. And I really just thought it was stretching, it helped my body feel good, and some of the breathing techniques and meditation techniques helped me to clear my mind. So yeah, I thought it was all good stuff, but we'll get into more of that later. Then we moved back home. I got a 9-to-5 after finishing high school, and I slowly crept away from the Bible, just kind of blamed it on not having enough time. But I kept with my yoga practice. I made sure that I chiseled out time for that. And shortly after moving home, I decided that I wanted to dedicate my life to yoga and helping other people feel as good as I felt when I was practicing. So I started taking a yoga teacher training course and attending classes in person and really doubling down on my practice at home, and just started taking those next steps. And then as I got more into yoga and the online course, kind of the first thing that we ran through was the history of yoga, its roots, where it came from, all the religious meaning behind it, and it was kind of crazy. It was like learning a whole new language, right? So it comes from the Hindu religion, and it was all of these words that I didn't know how to pronounce that seemed super foreign. So, that's a little scary to look at too when you're coming into it, but it felt pretty off to me, and I just thought that was because I was worried about learning a whole new language, and I think that was part of it, but also it felt foreign because it felt wrong to be doing for some reason, which I now know was the Holy Spirit just gently convicting me and telling me, hey, this feels wrong for a reason. But I just kind of told myself that I would look into the religious roots later, I would look into the history more later, even though I had the textbook and the videos right in front of me. I kind of just pushed that off to the side because I had already dedicated my life to this. I decided that's what my career was going to be, and this is what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. So I just kind of pushed it aside because I'm a pretty stubborn person, so I didn't want to give up on my dream. I just kind of decided to overlook the spiritual aspect of yoga. I told myself I didn't really have to include that in my practice, none of the chanting, none of the chakras, none of any of that stuff. but I decided, all the self-care and the physical aspects still related to me and to the people that I wanted to serve. So I just decided to press forward. And just a little side tangent here for you. It's kind of crazy when you're reading the Bible and you kind of get this like ominous view of the story and all the characters and the situation. And you can look at the story and go, what are you doing to some of the characters? Because we clearly know what happens in the end, right? Just for instance, the golden calf story, right? I think that's a pretty common one that most people would probably know. You're almost want to reach out and yell at these characters because here they are building another idol and worshiping this golden calf that they built because Moses was taking too long on the mountain with God. And obviously we know that that's going to end up very badly for them. But in the moment, that probably seemed like a pretty rational decision for them to make. They were like, well, we got freed from the Egyptians, so it must be some sort of God, so let's just throw all of our gold into the fire, see what comes out, and that must be the God that freed us from the Egyptians. So they were not trying to do anything wrong. They didn't think that they were doing anything wrong. They weren't intentionally trying to worship other gods or bring the one true God any less glory. They truly thought that Moses was gone or murdered or got lost or something on the mountain. And so they had the purest of intentions, and that's important to remember as we kind of get into this video more. When you look at it big picture, they seem like they're pretty dumb people for doing that stuff, but if you can put yourself in their shoes and realize, hey, I'm probably doing that with a couple things in my life, and there's a few things that are pretty obvious that I shouldn't be doing, but I'm doing them anyways because it seems rational. I encourage you to just use your own discernment and really take a good inside look at what your life looks like too. But yeah, so full circle with that. It seems pretty obvious in the golden calf story, and it should have been obvious to me too when I felt that conviction about doing yoga and learning more about yoga. But I didn't. I decided to ignore it just like those people did when they built that golden calf. So anyways, I pushed forward in my certification, got moving on to the anatomy and all of the poses. And I was kind of just in the middle of it. I was really struggling to study, which is very out of character for me. I was a person that school kind of came naturally for, so I always worked really hard at school and learned good study techniques and got good grades in school. So it was really weird for me and hard to understand why I couldn't study this stuff like I could study any other textbook. So that was kind of another red flag now looking back that I see too. But in the middle of studying it, and another one of my sisters sent me a video from the Heaven and Healing podcast, which is a great podcast. You should definitely go check that out if you'd like to learn more about yoga and some of the new age stuff. But Angela did a really great job at explaining what yoga is and how it is so deeply rooted in pagan culture and other gods, and how it's not just stretching. That's kind of the bottom line here. But yeah, so she sent me this video, and I almost didn't watch it because I was pretty afraid of it. I had already dedicated time, money, the last couple of years of my life to trying to get this yoga business started and off the ground. So I was pretty committed already and didn't want to give up on my dream. And I think I knew in the back of my mind that it would change my life. I was pretty scared of taking that leap for that reason. And I actually looked back in the text message with my sister because I was pretty curious, and I left her on read for 9 days before I responded, so sorry about that, Alice, if you're watching. But I finally watched the video 9 days later and replied to her saying I would check it out. And once I finally did watch the video, I was hooked, and I felt that immediate conviction. And I just felt that there was no denying that yoga was a pagan practice. I had my doubts and a couple of things that I wanted to look a little bit further in. So I spent probably a solid week doing tons of research, listening to a whole bunch of podcasts and finding articles and trying to see it from both sides. If you do any research on it, you'll find a lot of information that comes from both sides. There's people saying that, Christian yoga is okay. There's people saying you shouldn't do yoga at all. There's people saying that normal yoga is not a religious practice. So I encourage you to just do your own research, because not any one person is going to sell you on anything. My goal here is to just share what I've learned, and again, you can make your own opinion. So let's talk about it a little bit. For everyone who is a Christian watching this and doing yoga, I was there too. And my intentions were super pure. I didn't think that I was worshiping any other gods. All I wanted to do was just get a good stretch. And, I honestly didn't know of any of the religious roots of it. So it's okay if you're there. I just want you to hear me out and make your own decision. So I'll put all my sources that I used in the description below, and another couple podcasts if you want to check those out too. So let's just break it down right to the very definition of yoga. I think that's the easiest and most non-biased way to go about this here. So I just Googled yoga, and I'll give you the definition that came up here. It is a Hindu spiritual and ascetic discipline, a part of which, including breath control, simple meditation, and the adoption of specific bodily postures, is widely practiced for health and relaxation. In Sanskrit, it literally means union. So let's break that down. That first part of the definition is a Hindu spiritual and ascetic discipline. So right off the bat, it tells you that this is a religious practice rooted in Hinduism. I should just stop right there, but I won't. So a quote from the yoga teacher training course, Yoga Renew, which is the one that I was enrolled in, working on getting my certification from, says that yoga arises from Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, and other religions. And ascetic means the practice of severe self-discipline, that in the context of yoga is meditation to the point where your body and mind is completely still. It's otherwise known as enlightenment, which is kind of the ultimate goal of yoga. So an example that Angela used from Heaven and Healing podcast is that yoga is the vine of other religions, so it can't produce the fruit of Christianity. And any prominent yogi will tell you that the attempt to separate the spiritual from the physical aspects of yoga, it actually just goes against the fundamentals of yoga, because it was created as a spiritual practice and it's meant to be practiced as one. Just the first Bible verse for you here. In Acts chapter 15, verse 29, it says, "Abstain from things offered to idols." Yoga is a practice that is meant to worship these idols and other gods, little g gods. So right there, the Bible says abstain from it. And coming at it from a yoga perspective, the Yoga Sutras, which are considered to be like the basis text for yoga, don't even describe a single physical pose. They instead prepare the practitioner for enlightenment. Yoga is a spiritual practice with physical benefits. It's not the other way around. It does come with physical benefits, but it is first and foremost a spiritual practice. The main goal is to become one with the divine. It's about believing in the god or goddess in yourself and believing that you can reach enlightenment yourself. You don't need any outside gods. That is the goal of yoga, is to become one with the divine and to make yourself your own god. It's not just to help your body feel better. Alright, so the next part of the definition is including breath control and simple meditation. So for this one, I want to just run through the 8 limbs of yoga quick. I mentioned before that the 8th limb is enlightenment, which is not biblical. Again, I don't want to go into too much detail about all this stuff, but just to give you a little background on what the basis of yoga is the Yoga Sutras. So, I'll do my best to pronounce these correctly, but I was in an online course and I didn't have someone to teach me pronunciation, so forgive me if I pronounce them wrong. So the first limb of yoga is the yamas, which mean abstinence or discipline in English. They're a set of ethical rules to follow in relation to other people. So this is think of it as your not to do list. And then your second limb, once you master your not to do list, is your to do list. It's called the niyamas or observance. It's a set of virtuous habits or behaviors. And I just want to mention here, these first 2 limbs right off the bat sound an awful lot like a counterfeit for the Bible. You got your set of moral to-dos and to-don'ts, which, if you don't know already, Satan tries to take everything and make a counterfeit of it because ultimately God is the only way and he's created the best ways to live, but Satan tries to take them and put his own spin on it, and it does trick a lot of people, but not you since you're watching this video. So the third limb is your asanas, or your physical postures. This is the part of yoga that most people know, and this is the one part that people believe they can separate out. So asana just means physical posture in English. In the context of the Yoga Sutras, asana is meant as a way to prepare the mind for meditation by creating stillness and comfort in the body. That was a quote from my training course. So it's actually kind of crazy. There's not one physical pose mentioned in the Yoga Sutras. It's just a simple seat so that you can be still, you can create stillness in your mind, in your body, empty your mind, which again is not biblical. But yeah, so this is the only physical posture that comes from the actual basis of yoga. The next limb is pranayama, or breath work, and straight from my training course here, it says, quote, "By manipulating our breath, we begin to gain better control of our mind with improved concentration." So this is just another step towards emptying your mind. Next we have pratyahara, or the withdrawal of sense. Another quote for you here. "Pratyahara works on withdrawing from the senses to further quiet the mind. With better control over the senses comes freedom from them and the behaviors they drive us towards." So once again, working on emptying that mind, creating absolutely no thoughts or anything else to focus, even smells, sight, touches, any, fly lands on you, you're not supposed to feel that. You're just supposed to be still. Next we have dharana, or concentration in English. This is all about attaching your mind to a single thing, whether that's an object or an idea. People use the example of a candle, or an idea would be like the idea of love. You just try to concentrate on one object or one idea. Next you have dhyana, which is meditation in English. So it is the continuous flow of concentration towards the singular object or ideal established during the previous limb. And finally, once you've mastered all of those 7 limbs, you get to the 8th, which is samadhi, or enlightenment in English. This is when, quote, "the intellect retreats completely, and we are left without purposeful thought or any reflection. We can only see the I. This occurs when your self-consciousness slips away." So, all of that to say, enlightenment, the ultimate goal of yoga, is not biblical. It's actually quite the opposite. The Bible tells us to never empty our minds. I'll give you a few Bible verses here. 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 8, "Be alert and of sober mind." 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 13, "Therefore, with minds that are alert and fully sober." 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 5, "But you should keep a clear mind in every situation." So multiple spots in the Bible there. Meditation in the context of Christianity is filling your mind with the Bible and with God. So the Bible says all the time to meditate on His Word, meditate on Jesus. You're supposed to read His Word and think about how that touches you, how that affects your life, how you can apply that to your life. You're supposed to spend time meditating with God, talking with Him, and the meditation in the context of God is filling your mind with Christ-like things. And meditation in the context of yoga is completely emptying your mind to where you're just an empty box sitting here, not feeling anything, not hearing anything, smelling anything, not thinking about anything. You're just an empty vessel for any spirit to come and fill you. So that quickly turns into a demonic practice. When your spirit is empty, when your mind is empty, all you're doing is opening yourself up to all of these other spirits and deities to come and fill your mind. That's why God tells us to always keep our mind filled with Christ. So the next part of this definition is the adoption of specific bodily postures. So most yoga poses worship Hindu gods or deities. A quote from Eckhart Yoga says, "As a way of connecting to, revering, and paying respect to deities, many yoga postures represent not just what the deity looks like, but also everything they stand for. As we practice the posture, we put our focus on the energy and essence of the deity and look to embody their qualities." So this quote completely shuts down any claim that the physical poses can be separated from any spiritual significance that they might hold. The Hindu beliefs are entangled with the actual poses, so even though you may believe that you can take all the spiritual aspects out of yoga, you just can't do yoga without the poses because they are all meant to yoke you to one of the 330 million Hindu gods that exist. And if you'd like to check out which gods each pose pays respect to, you can either do a simple Google search or check out the Truth About Yoga video by Heaven and Healing that is linked in the description of this video. She kind of goes through pose by pose and shows you which ones, which gods you're yoking yourself to when you're doing those. So whether you choose to acknowledge it or not, you are worshiping other gods through yoga. And in the Bible, it clearly states in Exodus chapter 20, verse 3, "You must not worship any other gods except me." So I think this is pretty straightforward here. Even if you think that you can take out the spiritual aspects, even if you take out the meditation and you take out the breath work and all of the chanting and everything that goes into practicing yoga, you are still doing the poses at the end of the day, and the spiritual aspect is rooted in these poses too. Each pose was carefully crafted so that you would be paying respect to either like war scenes or what the god looks like itself. And you can kind of see this as you get further and further into yoga. The poses become more and more complex, and you can see that they weren't built so that it would bring you physical benefits. They were built to first pay homage to these gods and deities. So I just encourage you to do some more research on that if you'd like. Next part of this definition says, widely practiced for health and relaxation. So even though that some people might practice yoga only for the health and relaxation benefits, like I just got done saying, that doesn't take away from the fact that it's a practice rooted in Hindu religion that was created to ultimately guide people to enlightenment and to worship Hindu gods. Yoga in the United States is now kind of the westernized version, and that does attempt to take the Hindu religion out of yoga, but like I just said before, you can't separate the physical poses from the spiritual aspect of yoga. They're directly related. So even if you have intentions of just practicing it for health and relaxation,
unfortunately, you just can't separate the two. And the last part of this definition, in Sanskrit, it literally means union. So what does union mean in this context? Quote from my yoga teacher training course. It says, yoga means to yoke, or to make one. The intended yoking is that of one's mind and the divine. Which this goes directly against the Bible. Matthew chapter 11, verses 28 through 30 says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." So here we see once again that the devil has taken God's word and made a very enticing counterfeit of it. And this is one of the devil's main tactics, and that's why God tells us to stay alert, because the only person or thing that knows him better than we do is the devil himself. And the devil is very knowledgeable in all of God's ways, and he has a counterfeit for each and every one of them. So, I mean, we can go back to 1 Peter 5:8 that says, "Be alert and of sober mind. Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour." So, I mean, like I said before, the spiritual realm is very real, it's very dark, and you can get pulled into it very easily. And unfortunately, yoga is something that is a very controversial topic for Christians. When it really shouldn't be, because if you do even just a little bit of research, you'll find that it is a pagan practice that is a counterfeit.
So now that we've kind of gone through the basis of yoga, I just want to run through some common justifications that I hear for Christians doing yoga. So the first is, well, what if I do Christian yoga or holy yoga? Well, I'll give you a little quote here. It's from Brooke Boone, who is a prominent promoter of holy yoga. This is her business that she started to take yoga and put a Christian spin on it. She wrote, "Yoga can be thought of as a philosophy. It's the idea that by bringing a union of focus between mind and body, while simultaneously making the mind and body stronger and more flexible, we become more authentic people, able to hear God and experience Him in previously impossible ways." So I want you to examine carefully what she's saying here. So this is someone that is promoting Christian yoga. She says that holy yoga or Christian yoga allows Christians to, quote, hear God and experience Him in previously impossible ways. So if this is true, then why is the Bible silent about yoga? Why didn't Jesus teach yoga? To become more authentic people and truly hear God, do we really need to borrow a technique from Hinduism? Colossians chapter 2, verse 8 says, "Don't let anyone capture you with empty philosophies and high-sounding nonsense that comes from human thinking and from the spiritual powers of this world, rather from Christ." That verse right there, I think, is pretty powerful. Yoga is a Hindu spiritual practice. So why are we trying to reframe this into a Christian practice when it clearly says in the Bible to not worship our God in the ways that other people worship their gods? We're not supposed to let anyone use empty philosophies and high-sounding nonsense that comes from human thinking, which is exactly what yoga is. So even though the Bible never says the word yoga, I encourage you to look at verses that talk about other gods, other deities, other powers, humans that think they have the same powers as gods. There's actually a lot in the Bible when you look. You just can't look for the word yoga because it's not in there. In the same way that the word Ouija board isn't in there, right? God, if He had to list out every single thing that is a pagan practice, there would be a long, long list. So yeah, I just encourage you to do some looking. on what the Bible says about other gods. So another one that we hear is that yoga is a dark practice and we are trying to bring it into the light to redeem it for God. Because there's a verse in the Bible that says whatever is used for darkness, bring it into the light. But my problem with that is that's like saying, okay, an Ouija board is used for darkness, right? It's used for dark magic, for communicating with the dead. So let's try and put a positive spin on that and use an Ouija board to talk with angels or somehow put Jesus in the context of the Ouija board. Just using common sense and discernment, that's not a good thing to do. And in my opinion, that's just the devil trying to get you to participate in some of his practices that are ultimately going to lead you to the darkness. So we aren't called to redeem demonic rituals and practices and put a spin on them so that they can be used for God. We are supposed to stay away from all those things. So yoga is another one of those things. I know people think it sounds pretty dramatic to compare yoga to a Ouija board, but when you take a look at all of the individual poses and how they actually represent and depict these other gods and the war scenes and the truly horrible things that they depict, you'll see that Ouija boards and yoga really isn't that different in my opinion. So another question is, I just turn on worship music and I focus on Jesus while doing it. I swap out the meditation for prayer. How's that bad? Because I'm spending time with God, right? I'm incorporating him into yoga. I'll go back to the Ouija board example. That's like saying, I just turn on worship music while I'm using an Ouija board and I'm using it to talk to my dead relatives that I believe are my angels. I just want to say that even though your intent is pure, the devil doesn't care what your intent is. At the end of the day, you're still doing this demonic practice. What you're still doing is inherently evil, and you're still opening doors for the enemy to enter. The spiritual realm is very real, and it's not talked a lot about in churches. I think it should be. But it's very real, and it's very dark, and it's very easy to get sucked into. Even myself just starting as practicing yoga just for the stretching, I started to get into the chakras and the meditation and all the next steps of yoga. Yoga can be something that very easily leads into tarot and astrology and all of these other demonic practices. So I just want to take this time to speak out and say, hey, even though you think your intentions are pure and you're not doing anything bad, I want you to really take a look into what yoga is. 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 21 says, "You cannot drink from the cup of the Lord and from the cup of demons too." That's a pretty powerful verse when you're looking at it in the context of yoga here, or quote-unquote Christian yoga. Yoga is the cup of demons. You can't drink from the cup of the Lord and from the cup of demons. Just like the analogy of yoga being the vine of Hinduism, it can't produce the fruit of Christianity. Now, another thing people will say is, well, Christians have free will, and the Bible doesn't directly say that you shouldn't practice yoga, so you should just do whatever you want. You should continue practicing yoga because you have free will and all your sins will be forgiven if you give your life to Christ. So, first off, yes, everyone has free will. But I want us to take a look at 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 23. It says, "You," talking about the followers of God, "say, I am allowed to do anything, but not everything is good for you. You say, I am allowed to do anything, but not everything is beneficial." This verse just tells you you have the power to do whatever you want, including yoga. But before you do, you should take a look at if it's good for your soul as well as your body. Yes, you can do whatever you want, but I just want to encourage you to take a look if this is actually benefiting you in a spiritual way, or is it possibly hurting you? And if there's even a small chance of if it's hurting you, then why wouldn't you try and find an alternative that still gives you the same physical results? Another thing that I hear is, well, I have a strong faith, so I don't have a problem practicing yoga. God calls us to not participate in anything that could lead us or others away from Him. He tells us to leave the ways of the world and only follow Him. 1 John chapter 4, verse 4 says, "Greater is He who is in you than he who is in the world." I would also like to go back to the verse in 1 Corinthians chapter 8, verse 13 that says, "If what I eat causes another believer to sin, I will never eat meat again as long as I live, for I don't want to cause another believer to stumble." And earlier in that chapter, it talks about, well, this meat has been redeemed in the name of God, so it doesn't affect me anymore. And people like to use that verse to go against what I'm saying here, that yoga is a demonic practice. But if you go down further in chapter 8 there to that verse 13, where it says, even if I eat this meat, if it's not bad for me, if it's been redeemed in the name of the Lord, if that causes another believer to sin, I'll never eat it as long as I live, because I don't want to cause another one of my brothers or sisters to stumble. And that's pretty powerful stuff. Let's say that a new Christian sees you practicing yoga, and say you're doing Christian yoga, and they're like, okay, well, this person is doing Christian yoga, so that must be an okay thing to do as a Christian. And then they go to a yoga class, and they stumble because yoga is a demonic practice. Why would you ever show other people that doing yoga as a Christian is okay when you're giving others the chance to fall too? Why not just stretch instead of doing yoga? Another thing I hear is that some of the stretches that I'll be doing in my videos here look like yoga poses. So how is that different than just doing yoga in the first place? Well, I would like to say that there's not an infinite number of ways that your body can be moved and can be stretched. Therefore, there might be some overlap with some of the simpler poses. I mean, example number one, Sukhasana, or easy seat, which is just sitting cross-legged, exactly what I'm doing right now. Or Uttanasana, which is just a standing forward fold. But the difference is, with Simply Stretch, you aren't participating in those poses in the context of yoga. You're not participating in a yoga practice. I don't use the names of the yoga poses. I don't participate in any meditation. And the goal of Simply Stretch isn't to push your body as far as it can go into these poses or to worship any Hindu little g gods. Yoga can actually be hard on your body. So my goal here is to just come at it from a medical standpoint. Hey, let's stretch together, because stretching is amazing for your body, and I'm not saying you shouldn't stretch, but I'm also not saying that if you sit in a cross-legged position like I'm sitting right now, you're submitting to Hindu gods and you're worshiping other gods and deities, because no, Satan doesn't own the cross-legged pose here. But if you do it in the context of yoga, and if you get into some of the more complicated poses, these are your body looks pretty distorted when you're doing them. So in my opinion, stretching and yoga are two completely different things. There might be some small overlap with some of the poses, but they're still two completely different things. Stretching is coming from a medical standpoint. Yoga is coming from a spiritual standpoint. So as long as you can keep those two separate, you're not going to just fall over into a pose and all of a sudden be worshiping a Hindu god. So I don't want you to be afraid of that either. Stretching is so good for you. Please don't stop stretching. But just a few final thoughts for you as we kind of wrap up this video. Number one, I talked a lot about in this video that the poses are specifically made to worship these Hindu gods, and the Heaven and Healing podcast has a really great episode that gets into the nitty-gritty. She actually will show a yoga pose and show the God that you're yoking to in that pose. So that's a super interesting video. I'll link that below. It's pretty interesting to see how tightly these are yoked together and how you can't just continue to do the poses, because the poses are more than just physical stretching. They're built to worship these other gods. A second point I want to make is, why would you possibly cause other Christians to stumble? Even if you believe that doing Christian yoga is okay, newer Christians might not be able to discern the difference. Next point I want to make here is that yoga can be kind of a gateway to New Age. Like I said before, it's super easy to get into the meditation, the chakras, the chanting, tarot, astrology, everything that seems, pretty rational to a Christian as well. That can come pretty quick when you start with yoga. And a lot of yoga practices will start incorporating those things into them as you get further along. So I just want you to be careful of that. If yoga is just stretching, then why not just stretch instead? Why fight so hard to keep yoga in the name and in the stretching? Why don't you just take it out, just stretch? If that's all you want to get from yoga anyways. I guess I never understood really why it has to be Christian yoga when you could just do stretching. Like any stretches you would get from a physical therapist if you went into the doctor. So I guess I just don't really understand why people feel the need to fight so hard to keep yoga in the name of stretching. And just one final verse for you here. It's from Matthew chapter 16, verse 24 through 26. Then Jesus said to his disciples, "If any of you wants to be my follower, you must give up your own way, take up your cross, and follow me. If you try to hang on to your life, you will lose it. But if you give up your life for my sake, you will save it. And what do you benefit if you gain the whole world but lose your own soul? Is there anything worth more than your soul?" Jesus tells us to lay down the ways of the world. We're not supposed to live the way that the rest of the world lives. And yoga is a worldly practice. So we're supposed to give that up. And we're supposed to follow Jesus. Yoga is opening up your body. You're inviting demons in. You're inviting these other gods, which God tells us that any other gods come from Satan. Any other gods are demons. You're inviting these demons into your body. You're worshiping them and giving them your soul. So just like that verse says, what do you benefit if you gain the whole world but you lose your soul? And nothing is worth more than your soul. So I just want you to please consider all the things that I've just said. Do your own research about it, pray about it, use your own discernment to decide if you believe what I have to say. But I've put in a lot of time, I've put in a lot of effort into this, and it's truly something that God has put on my heart to share with the rest of the world. Please just take what I had to say into consideration. Like I said, I will put all of the articles that I read, all of the podcasts, all the ones that I can remember in the description below. That should get you started. And if you have any questions, please reach out to me. I'm more than happy to have a conversation. Like I said, I was there too at one point. I was practicing yoga, but there is no sin that is too large for God to forgive. So just know that too. If you have been practicing yoga, please call out to God. Please pray with Him and break that contract that you might have accidentally entered into with any other spirits. So thank you for taking the time to hear me out here. I hope that you learned something. And again, please reach out if you have any questions. Thank you.